Hello, welcome to my daily gardening and worm farm. In today's worm farm Q&A live, we're going to be discussing how we can increase our worm population, and we're also going to be discussing VOC in composting or vermicomposting. So how are you guys doing today? Now, there are many of us who are content with the amount of worms that we have in our worm bin. Hi, Cece. Our worms are producing enough castings and they're producing enough for us to give us all the castings that we need. So a lot of us are satisfied. Hi, Mom. And then there are those of us who would like to see an increase in our worm population. So what can we do? I am one of those who would love to see an increase in my worm population. So this video or this discussion is going to help those who are interested in increasing their worm population. Hi, Han White. Okay, so because I want to increase my worm population, there are a number of things and experiments that I will be doing this year to see what works best. So when I first started my worm bin, and I'm sure most of you on the live have already heard this story several times. When I first started my worm bin, it was outdoors. And I started with just a pound of worms. And those worms were spread across. Most of them were placed in one particular worm bin or compost bin, which it was at the time. A few of them were placed in another compost bin, and the rest of them were placed in the garden. Now, for the vast majority of them that was placed in my compost bin, they told me that within 3 months I would have a doubled population. But rather than doubling, I ended up with 20 times the amount of worms that I purchased. Now, I've never seen that increase ever again. But I have been so busy over the years that I haven't had any chance to try and find out what it is that caused the worm population at that point in time to increase that much. Hi, Noah Gardner. Yeah, so I have not been able to figure out what it is, what's the difference that has caused the worms not to increase as much as they did then. Mark you in that worm bin, because of the size of that worm bin, it is more as if they are not in confinement. So that could be one factor, I'm not really sure, but they had far more space than where they are now. I did mimic that environment in terms of having them in a large worm bin, which was twice, well, it wouldn't be twice, it would be the same size, just that it was more horizontal this time. But the bad thing or the negative thing was that the worm bin that I created for them, even though it had the same capacity, it was in the garage, so it wasn't outdoors, and it was in the garage for winter. So the population would not have increased the same way that it did with the bin that was outdoor. Hi, Russell. I am listening. We'll join in a few. Have to get some worms weighed and in new 14-day feed. Okay, no worries. Right. So I haven't really done anything to mimic that environment. So when the lady gave me those worms and told me that they would double their amount, that is pretty much what I was expecting. But the following year, I noticed that The winter I didn't really expect much because she told me that the population or the reproduction of the worms would slow down, even the feeding would slow down in the winter. And she has her worms in a heated garage all year round. And she told me that in the winter it will slow down, even though the temperature is consistent in her garage. So I expected them to slow down, but then the following year, I would have expected that if I put them outdoors in the same worm bin, they would perform the same. They didn't. I still keep in touch with her from time to time. I haven't spoken to her in quite a few months. But when I spoke to her the following year and the year after, she said that she noticed that the worms were not reproducing the way they used to. So I don't know if it has something to do with our environment that is causing it or not. Hi, Leafy Wiggy. But anyway, she did notice, and she, at that point in time when I purchased the worms from her, she had been doing worm farming for over 15 years, and she was saying that it's not just me, her worms, and she's not doing anything different. It's the same process every year for her. And she noticed that the worm population is just not increasing the way it used to. So I was saddened by that, but yet comforted because it means that maybe I'm not doing something wrong. Yes, so I'm gonna try this year to see if I can figure out what it is that is different. So I put my worms out. Now I wish I hadn't because we've been getting some really bad weathers. Temperature, we had snow. We had snow last night. Can you imagine that? I've never seen snow in May, and I've been in Canada for 11 years, and I've never seen snow in May. I've seen snow the last day in April, but I've never seen snow in May. We got a bit of snow, but the ground was too warm for it to stay. We didn't get a lot, but I was rather surprised to see that we were getting snow. It's a good thing I didn't follow my mind and put out my plants. But anyway, let's not stray off the point. Yes, so I put a lot of my worms outdoors. Well, not a lot, but some of them outdoors. I even put some out yesterday or the day before, and now I'm regretting it because the temperature was much lower than they said it was supposed to be. But I guess that is life. Right, so what I'm going to be doing now is trying to recreate the same situation by putting worms in that same worm bin. I'm going to try to care for the bin the way I did back then, if I can remember what I did back then, but I wasn't really doing much for them. I'm trying to remember if I was aerating their bin or did I just put them in there and just let them work on the bin. I knew I watered the bin very regularly. And when I bought the worms from her, she said, wet the bin, wet it thoroughly. I wet the bin thoroughly, as wet as I thought it could be. And she said, no, 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 had more water, had more water. So I had a whole lot more water. So maybe it was all that water that I had it. So from then, every time I water the bin, it would be a lot of water that I put in there. Now remember, this is not a container that will hold water. The water will run out of the bin. So if you're raising worms and you're trying to increase your population, do not overwater your bin, because all of the water, even with holes in it, your bin can retain a lot of the water because the worm casting is going to plug the hole to an extent. So the water will drip out, but it won't flow out of it. So don't overwater your worm bin. Mine is just made of wooden pallets, the outdoor compost bin that I'm putting worms in. So the water is free to run out as much as it likes. Right, so yes, so I'm just gonna try and see if I can get that same situation. Let's see, Leafy says, I think I've doubled worms at least. I think I've doubled worms at least my first month. Really? That's nice. I got 4 inches of snow on my lawn. Oh, you got more snow than I did. Yeah, we didn't get the snow that was out there. You couldn't see. The only thing The only reason I was able to see any snow is because I have compost in the backyard where I'm trying to regrow my lawn. So I was able to see it on the compost, but on the grass there was no snow, and on the concrete there was no snow. But where I have compost in the backyard, I was able to see a bit of the snow. But yeah, 4 inches, you got a lot. Yes. So I'm pretty excited because this is the first summer in 4 years of worm farming that I will be doing worm farming both outdoors and indoors during the summer. So it will be interesting to see what happens. All your plants are in the garage. Well, that's good. Yeah. I have some things that are planted outdoors, as you may have seen from some of my previous videos, like my potatoes and stuff like that. So for those, I covered them over last night. I am just hoping that the cover was enough to protect them from the frost, because I know there are times when the cover is just not enough. Yes, but whatever will be, will be. Okay, so what are some of the things that you can actually do to increase your worm population? Your method of feeding, that can play a big part in your worm population. How frequently you feed them, what you feed them, how moist your bin is, things like those. So let's discuss some of the things that we can do to feed worms. Now, there are some things that are considered to be aphrodisiac for worms, some foods. So I'm going to be giving you a list of them. Corn cobs, surprisingly, the outer part of the corn cobs, worms just love that. If you put that in the bin, you will just see worms all over it in no time. And then that soft tissue in the middle of the corn cob, they like to go in there, eat out that section, and then they will start to lay eggs in there. They love cantaloupe and watermelon, the rind of it. Well, they like the entire fruit, but they love the rind. We mostly give them the rind because we eat the fruits, the fruity part of it for ourselves. They love papaya, avocado, bananas, pumpkins, squash, mangoes, and stuff like that. But there is one thing that is consistent with the type of foods that is considered to be aphrodisiac for worms. And the thing that is consistent with it is that it is mushy, it is soft, and it is very moist. So I think it is more that softness, that moistness that makes it so attractive to the worms rather than the type of food that it is actually. Because as you know, the worms don't really eat the food scraps, they eat the microbes and bacteria that grow on the food scraps. So then it couldn't be that it is the food that they love. But the thing about these type of food is that foods that tends to be moist and mushy breeds bacteria very quickly. So that is what is attracting these worms to these types of food scraps. So it's not the food itself, but because these type of foods produce bacteria very quickly. Yes, so if you feed these type of foods to your worms, then that will help to increase their population. Coffee grounds promote breeding as well. Okay, I don't have any coffee grounds because we don't have coffee drinkers in our home. We only have coffee here in case we have guests, or maybe once a year my husband might want a cup of coffee. But yeah, I used to collect coffee from a restaurant. I need to start going back there and collecting food scraps. But because of the pandemic, I ended up stopping. But that was a nice place to get supplies from because I would get tons of eggshells, I would get tons of coffee grounds and lettuces from them because it is a burger place. So the supply was pretty good. I went there Mondays and Thursdays. I could go every day, and the amount of food scraps that they produce, is amazing, because they would only save what they used the previous day for me to come back, for me to come and collect the following day. And sometimes I'm leaving with 7 buckets, 5-gallon buckets full of food scraps, sometimes less. So yeah, but I don't really have coffee grounds to give them anymore, because I'm no longer collecting food scraps from the restaurant. But I've never really tried giving my worms coffee grounds. Even then, when I used to collect the food scraps from them, I always put it in my compost bin, compost it, and then after it's composted, I feed it to the worms. I wish I had tried giving it to them and see the result back then. Okay, now the next thing for your worms to reproduce is bedding. Bedding is very important. Worms like bedding because it tends to be fluffy, and because it is fluffy and loose, they can just run around in it freely and lay their eggs or their cocoons. It does not get as compacted as the rest of food scraps. So for this reason, bedding works pretty well. But as you may know, that I tend to feed my worms up until February of this year. I was feeding my worms just food, not food scraps, but finished compost. So for 1 year, all I fed my worms were finished compost. Now, what I find with feeding my worms finished compost, that was their bedding and that was their food source. So I wasn't giving them anything else. During that year, occasionally I might put food scraps in there, but because of the fruit flies and the mice going in and eating the worms and the food scraps, so because of that, I don't really give them food scraps. So 1 year, only finished compost. Now the result that I find is that it gets compacted. So I've changed my method since February, since the end of February. So now I'm mixing it with bedding, because I don't see as many cocoons in my worm bin when I'm feeding them just finished compost without bedding. Yes, I don't see as much cocoons as I would when I would use bedding in there. So bedding is very important. And when the material gets compacted, it takes longer for the worm to actually process it. So you can feed your worm finished compost, but you have to make sure that you have other things in the worm bin. So the bedding, and if you feed food scraps and the compost, then that's fine. But straight compost is definitely, after a year, I figured out that's not the way to go. Let's see. Beef Russell says, okay, I can rewatch later. I am interested in missed information. Okay, see you, Russell. Yes. So in October last year, I moved my worms to the garage and fed them a full bin of compost. It took them until January to process it, and the bin was fed compost that was 2 years old. So from October, and that was like the early part of October, until January, it took them that long to process a full bin of compost. And when in the summer, the same amount of worms, when I have them in my outdoor bin, they process everything that is in a bin that is 4 by 4 by 4 in 2.5 months. But here it took them from October until January to process the finished compost. So we're seeing here that definitely finished compost alone is not good to feed worms. Okay, you're saying you can watch now. You missed the first 17 minutes. Okay, yes. So that concludes me using just compost as my worm medium. I feed basalt rock dust, eggshells, crab meal, biochar, and most of my food scraps and shredded cardboard. Okay, that's a nice variety they're getting there. Yes. So when I restarted my bin, so I just described what I did with the finished compost. Now, when I restarted my bin in February, this is what I find. I had the dry leaves, shredded paper, and the compost. Those bins have already been harvested. It is now the middle of May. Those bins have already been harvested. Of course, we are having warmer weather now, so that can play a part in the fact that the bin was processed faster, but the time that it took for the worms to process the bin from October to January, that is 4 months. And it took the worms 2 months to process the material that I gave them from February until now. So based on this, then I know that definitely finished compost is not the way to go. When I had my worm bin, that one large worm bin in the garage, before I set up the shelvings, I had the bin was 4 feet by 8 feet and 2 feet deep. Over the winter, when I brought them indoors, I filled the bin to the very top with dried leaves, and then I would feed them food scraps in between and finished. No, I wasn't feeding finished compost at that time. So it was just food scraps and a bin full of leaves. They processed that in the entire winter. So that was faster than using the compost that I fed them last year. So definitely I know that they require bedding material, and the material cannot be something that is going to be compacted. So when you're feeding your worms, keep that in mind. So don't follow my example of trying out the compost alone for your worms. That will slow them down. The worms eat compost faster than paper as they have to pre-moisten the paper before they can suck it in. Yes, they will eat it faster, but the thing is that the compost that I was feeding my worm did not contain any paper for 1 year. I fed them just finished compost. So because it is just finished compost, it settles and it gets compacted, so they can't move around as freely as they would if you have paper and other stuff mixed in with it. So now when I restarted the burn bin in February, it was compost mixed with leaves and paper, and they were able to process that a whole lot faster. So it's not that they don't eat the compost fast, it is just that because it was only compost, then that slowed them down. Of course, winter played a part in them slowing down too. And given that we had a really nasty week of cold weather, that played a part too, but that was like February. So, and we had a pretty mild winter. So from October up until about the middle of January, it was fairly warm. It was warmer than usual winter. So you would have expected that they would be processing the food faster, but they did not process it any faster. So definitely finished compost alone should not be fed to worms. It has to have other materials in there. Unless, of course, you're not concerned about building your worm population fast, or you're not concerned about how fast they produce castings. Okay, so next question. how you can increase your worm population. So we say what you feed them is very important. This thing doesn't want to stand up. See. It also says the diatomaceous earth solve the compactiveness. Okay. For the diatomaceous earth, I don't know. I don't put a lot in my worm bin. I just put a little on the surface of the worm bin because I don't really have a lot of diatomaceous earth actually. So, and I can't get it at a reasonable price. So I don't really use a lot of that in my worm farm. Now, if you want to increase your worm population, processing the food before you feeding it to the worms will help, because when you process your foods, you're increasing the surface area of the food, which means it's going to break down faster, which means it's going to produce more bacteria for the worms. When the worms realize that they have more bacteria to feed on, that is going to make them happy and they're going to reproduce more. So you can process your food scraps either by blending it and making the particles smaller, or you can freeze it and allow it to thaw out, allow it to reach room temperature before you actually give it to the worms. Doing these things will help to, or the next method is, if you don't want to freeze it or if you don't want to blend it, put the food scraps down, whether in a container or whatever, and allow it to break down a little bit and then feed it to them. These methods will help your worms to eat faster. It fluffs it up. It fluffs, it fluffs up the compost and helps lock in the moisture control and allow efficient harvesting of castings when screening is the method. Okay. Hi, Janice Sullivan. I have a raised garden. I'm ready to start planting. Lovely. And throw a few worms in there. Yeah, I have a few. It's not time for me to start planting yet. I don't know what is going to happen after today, because with the weather we've had in the last couple of days, all those seeds that I've sown outside, I'm not sure what's going to happen to them. I hope they're okay. I don't know if they have started their germination process yet. I haven't seen anything of my my peas germinating yet, and I should think maybe it's about 7 days now. They say 7 to 10 days. So I'm kind of glad they didn't germinate yet. Hopefully they will, but because of the cold weather, I'm hoping that they're okay, because some of them were the only peas I've got. So do I put my casting in and mix it in and then add more casting in the hole I'm putting them in? That would be overkill. If you are trying to amend the soil, so if you have soil in your bin already and and the soil is not the best quality and you're trying to amend the soil, then you can put in more castings. But if you're not trying to amend your soil, then you just need to add it to your bin once before you actually plant. Worm castings does not require the same volume that you would use when you're using compost or store-bought organic fertilizer. You don't need that volume. You can actually use less because of the fact that the worm casting will slowly release its nutrients. So you don't have to use a lot. You can either add it to the entire garden and mix it in and then plant, or you can add the castings to the individual holes that you're planting in and then plant. Hi, Nikki. The next thing that you need to consider if you're trying to increase your worm population is temperature. Temperature plays one of the most vital role when it comes to worm reproduction. If it is possible to keep your temperature consistent, then you will see an explosion of worms. Worms respond even to just 1 degree change in temperature. So for ideal conditions, it is best to keep your temperature between 15 and 26 degrees Celsius, because that is when worms reproduce the best. Moisture is also another very important factor in controlling your worm population. As I discussed in last week's, well, the week before last live, worms require a lot of moisture in order to breathe. You don't want to give them too much moisture, because then that will dispel the air in the moisture and prevent them from breathing. So they require a good amount of moisture, and if they don't have enough moisture, they're going to be secreting the moisture from their body to keep their skin wet so that they can keep on breathing. That is going to slow them down drastically. It's also going to weaken them. So it is important for them to have the right amount of moisture in their worm bin. So even if your worms don't die from not having sufficient moisture because they're secreting the moisture in the body, it is seriously going to affect them. So for the best results where raising your worms are concerned, the reproduction, you want to keep your moisture content between 80 and 90%. That is ideal. Let's see. Janice says, while the worms are in the bin, we use the water that has sat for 24 hours. Is the water from the hose okay for my red wigglers that will be in my raised bed? Yes, it is okay. Most times when I'm wetting my worms, it's water from the tap that I use if I don't have rainwater. It doesn't seem to harm them. Rosa says, my general method to increase worm population is to make more cocoons by taking 100 worms with a saddle per gallon of bedding, shredded and with worm chow mix. Separate in 14 or 21 days. Okay, it's a nice method. Oh, you sent that before you finished typing, no worries. Yes, so keep your temperatures between 15 and 26 degrees Celsius if you are able to, and your moisture content between 80 and 90%. Now, the amount of space available in your worm bin is also important. It is said that for every pound of worm that you have, you need to have a square foot of surface area in your bin. And this will make your worm comfortable. But there is always variations to every rule, right? So if you have a bin that you feed a small amount on a consistent basis, then your worms won't have a lot of space to run up and down. If you put a lot of bedding in your worm bin, the worms are going to be able to move up and down throughout the entire content that is in your worm bin. So the more content you have in the worm bin, the more space your worms have to run up and down. When the worms realize that they have a lot of space, they reproduce more. So that is how you're going to increase your worm population. Now, there's a flip side to this though, because if the worms have so much space that the worms are scattered all over the bin, where when it is time for them to mate, they have to travel far and wide to find a mate, that is going to slow down the rate at which they reproduce. So you don't want to stretch the content of your bin to the extent where worms have to be going far and wide to find a partner. Yes, so keep that in mind as you try to increase your worm population. Okay, so not everyone desires to have a large population of worms. They are satisfied, most persons are just satisfied with having enough worms to provide them with the castings that they need for their garden and if they want to share with family and friends. But a lot of people are not necessarily concerned about having a really large population of worms. So if you do not have that desire for more worms, then that is okay. Now, once your worm bin become overcrowded, then you will need to separate the worms and create more worm bins. If you don't want to have more worm bins, however, it is okay. You need not worry about the population of worms that is in your worm bin as long as you have the amount that you need, because the worms will regulate their rate of reproduction if there's too much worms in the bin. So whether the older ones are going to crawl out of the bin so that the younger ones can stay and keep on reproducing, or they're just going to slow down how often they lay their cocoons, the worms will regulate their rate of reproduction if there is too much worms in your bin. So you need not worry about that. So if all these conditions are met, where the worms have enough food to eat, they have enough moisture in the worm bin, the temperature is consistent or fairly consistent, then these worms will reproduce a lot faster. And you also need to consider whether your bin is acidic, yes or no too, because that plays a part in worms being happy or sad. Let's see, Russell says, with the red wigglers, I have a main bin and I will just pull out a handful per bucket once a week. After 20 weeks, the first bucket has about 1.5 pounds of worms. The other buckets come in succession. Okay, that's a nice and efficient way of doing it. Yeah, that's a very nice way of doing it. Now, some people use a more severe method to increase their worm population, but I don't like this method. It works, but it's not one that I'm going to be recommending that you use. Now, what they will do is they will use methods where they torture the worms, for lack of a better term. Yes. So what they will do is use one of these factors. They will either create temperatures in the worm bin that well, they will create temperatures in the worm bin that the worms do not like. Now, when the worms realize that conditions are not ideal, the temperature is not ideal, and they feel as if their population is in danger, they will start to lay in cocoons quickly because cocoons might be able to survive where the worms won't. So they will start to lay a lot of cocoons in the hope that the population will keep growing. Hi, her healthy home. Yes, or they will reduce the moisture in their worm bin to a condition that is less than ideal for the worms, or they will reduce the amount of food that the worms have. Now, as I said before, if the worms feel like their species being threatened, then they're going to start laying a lot of cocoons in order to preserve the species. So this is a method that a lot of people use in order to increase their worm population, but I don't like this method I believe that if you give the worms the conditions that they really like, they will perform much better than if you use this less than ideal method of reproducing. So don't torture your worms. Feed them properly, give them the amount of moisture they require, give them the appropriate temperature that they require. See to it that the conditions, all the conditions in the worm bin are as close to possible as what the worms prefer. If you do that and your worms are happy, they will just keep on reproducing. So you don't have to use this more drastic method for them to reproduce. Because when you think about it, if someone was to starve me or put me in an extreme hot or extreme cold conditions, or put me in a little tiny space for whatever reason because they want me to do something for them and I don't want to do it, I would not be pleased. So therefore, I would not be doing that to my worms. Of course, they don't, when they use these methods, they don't really allow the worms to die. They will only do it for so long and then they will quickly return the worm bin to the proper condition that it's supposed to be. But I still think it is less than ideal. Okay, bye, New Art Gardeners. Thank you for stopping by. Have a lovely day. Enjoy your weekend. Yeah, so I wouldn't use this method. Just try to give the worms the ideal conditions that they prefer, and things should be okay. So, have any of you ever tried any method of increasing your worm population? I know Russell just mentioned the method that he uses. I've never really tried any method to deliberately increase my worm population. I always just feed them and let them do whatever. The only thing is that when the summer comes, I would put a lot of them in my outdoor worm bin because I know that when they're in that worm bin, they reproduce a lot faster. But in terms of going out of the way to do something to make them reproduce more, I've never really done that. Not yet, anyway. Let's see. Russell says, yesterday I did a temp check on the 14-day yeast experiment, 2 to 3 degrees warmer. Okay. It was 1 tablespoon yeast with that one. Next bucket I will work on in 14 days. I will make casting tea. Okay. So the yeast warm up the worm bin. So, what about is there any visible difference in terms of you don't have mold growing in your worm bin or anything like that from the yeast, do you? And do the worms seem to like it? Let's see. And White says, I only feed my worms and leave them to it. Okay. Russell says, then I can check under the scope in 15 days. Okay. Okay. Leafy says, paper promotes more breeding than cardboard, but they like eating the cardboard more. I know they definitely love the cardboard because paper can become compacted too, depending on the size of the paper that you have in there. They love the cardboard more specifically because of the holes that are in the cardboard. They like to go in between there and lay their cocoons, and they like to eat in there too. Yes, so I know they definitely seem to enjoy the cardboard a lot more than the paper. Russell says, this week I will do 3 buckets with 1 tablespoon, one with 2 tablespoons, and one with quarter cup. Okay, yes, I'll be waiting for the results. Is that where your cocoons are hiding? That's a strong possibility. They love to go in there. Okay, so in order to figure out what happened with my first worm bin outdoors, I'm going to be starting an experiment where I'll create 3 small worm bins, and all 3 bins will be fed food scraps, but one bin will have paper and cardboard as the bedding, one will have compost as the bedding, and the other will be just plain food scraps without bedding. Now I will be observing all of these 3 bins to see what happens, to see if there is any that the worm prefer more than the other. So all 3 bins, one is going to have bedding, which is the compost, mixed with food scraps. The other one is going to be plain food scraps, and then the other is going to be food scraps with shredded paper and cardboard. So I'm going to be comparing the 3 and to see what happens with them. I will also be doing another experiment where I maintain the right temperature, the right moisture content, and to see how well it's gonna go. So one of the bin is going to have the right amount of moisture in it, and then the other one is going to have less than the ideal, well, less than the recommended amount of moisture. It's not going to be too dry where they don't have enough moisture. They're going to have sufficient moisture, but not the amount that is ideal for them. So I can compare the 2 bins to see how they perform and to see which one of them, if any, is going to be reproducing more than the other. So as I conduct these experiments, I'm going to be keeping you guys updated as to what is happening with them. Not necessarily on the live, but by means of videos. Now, I'm not sure when I'm going to start these experiments because I have a number of projects that I'm working on, and I'm not sure when these projects are going to be finished. And I want to be able to dedicate the time to these experiments so that I can monitor them properly, so that I can maintain the bins properly. So I'm not going to be starting them just yet. Russell says the worms will be going into the first bucket today. Oh, nice. After I screen the next bucket, when I'm getting weight of worms, I get to put my hand in experimental yeast bucket. Then the worms go in for 14 days. Okay. Definitely we'll be waiting on the update. Okay, so let's talk a bit about VOC. Now, what happens when food scraps get thrown into the landfill? When food scraps get thrown into the landfill, a large quantity of food waste will get buried and covered with dirt or soil, and it will start to break down. Now, in this process, as it breaks down, it will be producing VOC, which is volatile organic compound, and it will be producing methane gas. Yes, methane gas is like you rightly say, Russell. Now, methane is a very potent gas that can actually cause changes in climatic conditions. Yes, Janice, go ahead with your question. Right, so methane can cause climatic changes. So how can we reduce the VOC and methane that is being produced in the landfill? Well, most of you on the live here today are already doing it. It is either by composting or by vermicomposting. Now, what is VOC? As I said before, it is a volatile organic compound. Now, it is a broad term that is used for chemicals that will evaporate and has carbon in it. Now, in a worm bin, the food scraps will break down faster than when it goes to the landfill, and especially so because the worms are helping to break down the food scraps. And this is going to reduce the amount of methane and other VOCs that are being produced when they're, so this works faster than if the food is in the landfill because it takes a good while for all of that to break down. So by using worms, you are helping the process. VOC from composting or vermicomposting, is it harmful to humans? Research has shown that the VOC that comes from composting or vermicomposting is more alcohol than anything else. And because of that, it has very low toxicity. So it is not as bad as other VOCs, and it's not as harmful as other VOCs. Alcohols produced by VOC or breaking down of organic matter, they tend to be hundreds, sometimes even 1,000 times less toxic than other forms of VOCs. VOCs, however, are everywhere. The materials that are used to build your homes will off gas. Materials used in your vehicles will off gas. So VOC comes from pretty much everything around us. It can be either from man-made material or from natural sources. Let's see. How often do I put castings in my garden all summer? I should place it on top or kind of mix it into the soil around the plants. I keep hitting send before I'm finished typing. Okay, that is going to depend on what you're growing. There are some plants that are heavy feeders and some are not. So things like your squash and your tomatoes, those are heavy feeders. If they're heavy feeders, you're going to feed them more often than you would feed your lettuces and cabbages and stuff like that. If it is fruit producing, you're going to be feeding it more frequently than you would for your leafy vegetables. Once per week is good enough for your heavy feeders. Once every 2 weeks for your light feeders is okay. And that also depends on how much you actually put on your plants. If you're putting a lot on your plants, then you can go longer without fertilizing. You can also make a worm tea because it is a good pesticide as well as fertilizer. Well, in Canada, it's not recognized as a fertilizer. Casting is recognized as a supplement in Canada, but whatever they want to call it, same difference when it comes to taking care of the plants. It provides the nutrients that your plants need. So you can make a worm tea with it. If you're making a worm tea, then you can water not just the root of the plant, but the foliage of your plant because it works as a good pesticide. If you're using worm tea, you can fertilize your plant every week with it. The good thing about the worm casting is that you cannot over fertilize your plant because the worm casting or the worm tea will not burn your plants. So you can't actually over fertilize with it. So that's the good thing. So it's not a situation where you can use too much. It's just that if you use too much when you're not amending your soil, it just counts as a waste. But yeah. Oh, it's your first time live with me. Pose it properly, please. Thank you. daughter is trying to get back in here for school. I don't know why she don't just stay out there. It's not as if she can't. Yes, well, welcome to the live, Janice. You might notice I call you Janice and not Janice, because in Jamaica we say Janice. Janice, I don't think I'm ever going to get used to calling anybody Janice. Maybe if there wasn't an E and then. But yeah, so the VOCs, it's everywhere. It's some material will give off their VOC within weeks or months. Some takes even 20 years to fully off gas. So we don't really have full control over the things around us off gassing, but there are times when we can help to control. And so, good job for all of you on the live today who are vermicomposting. And for those who are considering vermicomposting, good job. There are some of us who would want to, but circumstances does not allow. You need not feel worried about that. Those of us who can will do it for you. Russell says, when I do the quarter cup yeast experiment, I expect VOCs. Oh, okay. Yeah. We don't have full control over such things, but we just have to do our part as much as is possible. Yeah, so when it comes to our worm bins and our compost, we don't necessarily have to worry about the amount of VOC that is being produced because it is more alcohol than anything else. But then you know that if you're in an environment with lots of alcohol and no air supply, then you can suffocate. But I don't think any of us are composting or vermicomposting on that scale where we need to be concerned about it. Yeah. Okay, so now I have discussed everything I have prepared for you guys. So how are your gardens and stuff coming on at the moment? Are you guys having fun yet? Let's see, Russell says, I already know the measurement I will use. I already know the measurement I will use will be 1 tablespoon. Okay. Yeah, that video that I did about me, my pepper, my Scotch bonnet pepper that I transplanted and used the hose to get the what are those, the fungus gnat larvae off the root. I am so impressed with that little pepper plant because I took it out, I beat all I sprayed the root with the hose, and it took quite a while before I transplanted it. I think I had it out of, it wasn't in any water or anything for maybe an hour or more. And I transplanted it, and the plant did not even look as if I did anything to it. It just remained solid, just like before. But it's doing pretty well at the moment, which I'm grateful for. Now I'm gonna see if it is gonna start producing some peppers for me, because after that torture that the fungus gnat larvae put it through, we'll see what happened. But I don't have it where it can get pollinated at the moment because it is in my garage. And we haven't had any good weather in the last couple of days, so my plants have been stuck in the garage for 3 days, today counted. So I'm dying for the weather to change. But we have some good news because we're finally expecting some rain, which I'm happy for and sad at the same time because I have some outdoor work that I need to get done that I was looking forward to for this week. This week? No, next week. Yes, I have some outdoor work that I have to get done quickly. And I was planning to try to get it completed next week, but with rain coming for 3 days, I won't be able to do anything about it. But I'm glad for the rain because we haven't had any rain at all since the spring started. Not well, I shouldn't say at all. We had a little bit that was for about half an hour, and it was so little bit that I could stand out there for the whole half an hour and I would not be soaking wet. So pretty much it's as if we did not get any rain all spring. So I'm pretty happy. Hopefully we'll get those rains. Oh, let's see. Uh, also says I notice all my peppers have flowers. That's nice. Yeah, I was looking at my plants yesterday and I noticed that one of my, I think that is either the red or the orange Scotch bonnet pepper. It is only 6 inches tall and that thing has a flower on it. I'm like, what? What is this thing doing? And if you see the stalk of the plant, it is just, it's not even an eighth of an inch thick and yet still it is flowering. I'm like, is this plant crazy or what? But anyway, it seemed to be ready to do its thing, so I'm not gonna interfere. What do I know? Yes. But anyway, Jenny says, I am in Toronto. I thank you so much saying my name like that. Thank you for answering my questions. You're very welcome, my dear. You're very welcome. Leafy Wiggy. My sunflower is almost 3 feet now. Whoa. That plant is on a roll. Brought it back into my living room garden. Okay. Yeah, I guess this weather would not be a very nice one for it to be outdoors. I'm kind of glad I didn't plant out some of the things because I was going to plant my peanuts outside because I'm going to attempt to grow peanuts here in Saskatchewan for the first time. And it should have been planted 2 weeks ago. I'm kind of glad I did not because with this weather that I'm getting, if it had germinated, there would be no bringing it indoors because it's not going to be planted in a container that can be brought indoors. But at the same time, that's not good because if I had planted it at the recommended time, it would be ready for harvesting late September. Now I'm going to have to plant it in a container that can be brought indoors because late September will definitely be having frost in the latter part of August or early September. So I'm going to have to plant it in a container that I can move it indoors. But I guess that's life. You cannot control everything. You just do your best and hope for the best, and whatever happens, happens, and keep going. Let's see. Verse says the tomatillos have had flowers for 2 weeks now. Oh, are they planted outdoors already, Russell, or are they still in trays? I like to put a tomatillo in a pot and move it around as the bees follow it like flies. Oh, what is it about it that makes them want to follow it around? Oh, I get you, I get you, I get you. Because it is blossoming, you're moving it around so that the bees can go around and pollinate other stuff in your garden. Nice. Hmm, interesting. Yes. I'm wondering as I look at my apple tree blossoming the other day, I was thinking, you know what? Those plants that I have outside my Scotch bonnet peppers, maybe I should put them close to the apple tree because then maybe the bees will help me to pollinate them because they're constantly either in the house or in the garage and there's no insect there to pollinate them. So I was wondering if maybe I should put them close to my apple tree. Maybe I will just do that. Still in Dixie cup, not a pot of 5 gallon. Oh, 5 gallon bucket. Okay. Okay. Well, that's nice. They're still in cup and they're ready to produce. I'm still not seeing a lot of those pollinators at all. I see a few bumblebee and I see a wasp. The wasp seem to be coming out from the underneath my main raised bed. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to try to find a way to get rid of them because they seem to live in the ground because they're always going underneath the bottom of the raised bed. So I'm gonna have to try to find some means of getting rid of them. I'm not sure what to do because where they are, I can't really get to them, and I don't want them to increase their population underneath there because one stung me last year, and my leg where they stung me was hard for a few months. And my kids like to walk there to go around to the worm farm to look at the worms. So I have to try to get rid of them as quickly as possible. So if you have any suggestion as to what I can do, regular wasp that lives up on the buildings and stuff, those you can handle quite easily, but I don't know what to do about those that live in the ground because it's not as if I can move the raised bed to get to them. So it's a bit tricky. So if any of you have any suggestions, I'll be quite happy. Yes, but I'm not seeing a lot of the pollinators, even now that so many of the plants in the yard are blossoming. I'm not seeing, I don't know, I'm not, maybe it's still too cold, I don't know, but by the time they come out, all of the fruit trees will actually start blossoming already. Yeah, I'm seeing the wasp and the bumblebee, but not the honeybee. In fact, I haven't seen the honeybee here in maybe three, in maybe 3, 4 years. I attempted to start a beehive. That was three years ago. But then I ordered the bees. I bought everything. I made the boxes for the bees. I ordered all of the equipment that I needed, and I ordered the worms. I ordered the bees and waiting. Ordered it in January. The bees were supposed to get here in March. March came and went, nothing. I'm not hearing anything. Then they call me in April and says, "Oh, your bees will be here in a week, so you need to come and pick up." And then I got another call the day before I was going to pick up. "Oh, sorry, the bees are not ready yet." And then a few weeks later, I got another call. Sorry, we have to cancel your order. There will be no bees available this year." So no one who ordered bees was able to get any from that supplier. And as far as I'm hearing, it was not just that supplier, but it seemed as if something happened to the bees across the country. So I don't know. I don't know what happened, but they did not give us a reason. No, you could not ask for them to give you a reason what happened. So I don't know what's going on. I didn't. And then the following year, I was going to order some more. Then the time passed. I did not remember to do so. But now there is a daycare next door to me, so I don't think I'm going to bother get any because I don't want to be producing bees with so many kids around. And especially since as I know that the lady running the daycare is allergic to bees. So yeah, no bees for me. But I haven't seen honeybee in such a long time. Yeah, I don't I don't want to see the bumblebee. I want to see the honeybee, but whatever comes, I'll take, just as long as it's not the wasp. Leafy Wiggy says, "I'm pulling for the bees. The world need them. Desperately need them, but as far as they're saying, the bees population worldwide is in trouble. It's not just here. It's just that in my region, it seems as if something is going on, and I'm not sure what it is. But with the amount of chemicals that farmers use in these regions, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all that the bees cannot be found. But what can you do? Sometimes we're aware of the problems, but what it takes in order to correct the problem, we might not have that type of resource, or sometimes it takes time. And with a short growing season like we have in Saskatchewan, time is not something that we have. So, yeah. Anyway, I think we are at the end of our live. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for all your participation. And I hope you guys will have a lovely, lovely weekend. And stay safe. As Russell says, there was a mail truck full of dead honeybees. I read today in Pennsylvania. They say they could have been saved if early action would have been taken. Oh, that is so sad. That is so sad. Yeah. And White says, have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And Leafy says, take care. Yeah. That is sad about the bees, though. Especially since something could have been done about it. That makes it even sadder. Anyway, you guys take care, and I hope to see you again on Monday. And enjoy your gardening. You're welcome, Mom.